Welcome to this edition of Innovative Conversations. These conversations are supported by the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services and our friends at Case Western Reserve University. I'm Patrick Kanary, and I will be hosting this conversation between our two guests today. I'm really pleased for the opportunity to talk to two local guys who are national experts in the area of working with kids and families and adults in mental health and substance abuse disorders, co-occurring disorders, the whole gamut of behavioral health. And the particular area we're going to focus on today is their experience, their expertise, their thoughts about a skill set that is, pretty much on fire and has been for a while in our field, and that is motivational interviewing, which we will shorthand to MI probably through most of this conversation. So my two guests are Jeremy Evenden from the Center for Evidence-Based Practices at the Begun Center at Case Western Reserve University, and Michael Fox, who is at the Center for Innovative Practices at the Begun Center at Case Western Reserve University. So for those of you who don't know, there's one large center in the social service area at Case called the Begun Center for Violence Prevention, Education, and Research. And within that center, there are multiple other centers, of which Jeremy's and Michael's are both a part of. So welcome to you both, and thanks for taking the time to do this. Welcome.
Thanks, Patrick.
Very happy to be here, Patrick.
Great.
Thanks for inviting us.
Good to see you both, too, both colleagues and friends here. I'm going to refer to our listeners or viewers to the link to this podcast to look at your bios. And I'll just, shorthand by saying you both have lots of letters after your names, which indicate to me that you know a lot of things about a lot of things, and folks can drill down and look at those. But your experience and your expertise, I think, really speaks for itself. But I think people will want to take a look at your bios, and we'll go from there. The kind of the focus today is not really, well, not at all, a training in MI. It is maybe more of a 10,000-foot view of MI. And I just thought of this a little bit earlier. If we think about who the audience might be for this podcast, it wouldn't be likely people who are practicing MI, but it might be people in organizations who are thinking about it, who are just entering into the world of MI, are contemplating how that can be a part of what they do in their organization. So I think if we come at it from that way, is probably helpful. So I'm not assuming our audience is going to be heavy-duty practitioners of MI, but folks who maybe are opening the book and saying, or have heard one of your trainings, or have been to one of them, or has read some stuff. And like I said, it's certainly out there in so much literature that I see. And so we thought it would be timely to take a little bit deeper dive and talk about it. So I'm wondering, and feel free, both of you, jump in, either or, however you want to do it. Most of my questions are not totally directed at somebody. A few are. So, whatever you're comfortable doing. But I was wondering if we could get just kind of that 10,000-foot view, I'll say definition, that might be the wrong word, but maybe explanation of what MI is.
Well, at its heart, motivational interviewing is a conversation with somebody about a change that they're thinking about making. It's a special kind of conversation in that it includes skills that help a person think more about it and talk more about a change that they want to make in a way that increases the chances that they'll be more likely to follow through with it.
So, I'm speaking as a non-clinician, but somebody who has been in the orbit of clinicians for many, many years and has absorbed a few things by osmosis. Um, does MI fit into a category of treatment, skill, intervention, fill in the blank? Is there a sense in the field how where it sits in our kind of toolkit of resources?
Yeah,
I'll go first. Actually, I'm going to talk over you, Jeremy, because I want you to do second. For those listening, Jeremy is the MI guru, just front, back, middle, everything. I'm just MI adjacent. And so I have the good 20,000-foot view, and then Jeremy sees the details underneath that. I think the applicability is very wide, and specifically because it is not truly, it's not a therapeutic style or approach.
Mm-hmm.
It's often presented that way, and because it has evidence-based backing as a support for change, I think a lot of entities consider it as a therapeutic style. Exactly as Jeremy said, it's a way to have a conversation. Almost any kind of change-based relationship that a person has, MI can fit into that without drastically altering the way that the person is already approaching supporting change.
Okay.
So there's my 20,000-foot view, and I would like to hear Jeremy's input on that.
Well, first of all, you can call me a guru, Michael, but I'm still learning, and many people like me are still learning that are training other people in motivational interviewing. So it's if you get to the point where you think you fully understand MI, you got it, you don't need any more, you probably need some. So that's first and foremost. It's a constant learning process, and the reason why it's a constant learning process is because motivational interviewing is based on listening to the person you're talking to, and learning from them. So a lot of times in the field, we're focused on bringing some fancy model to the table, some fix for whatever the person is going through, and putting them through the process of whatever that model is. They need to kind of get on board with the program. Motivational interviewing does a reverse in many respects. It listens to the person that you're talking to and builds what to do off of where the person's thinking is going. So we're really doing more following of the person with some intentional direction in mind. But that's all collaboration between the person and ourselves as the helper. So motivational interviewing fits into the field in that it's a really helpful way to support what you might already be doing in order to help people change. So MI can really help people go from not thinking about it to thinking about it to getting ready to do something about it to actually jumping into a program that already exists.
Right.
And it fits very well with if you look at the research, it's been researched that way, very in an in-depth way. In that often what you see is motivational interviewing is used to enhance some other practice.
Okay.
It originated in substance use treatment. Bill Miller was doing what he called the drinker's checkup, which is giving very specific feedback to people who were struggling with alcoholism. and a battery of various tests, and then giving that feedback in a way that is empathic versus confrontational, which was kind of the practice at the time and before that. So motivational interviewing grew up out of substance use treatment world, but Michael was saying earlier, that a lot of people think of it as therapy, and it's really not. It's much broader than that. In the same way, a lot of people think of motivational interviewing as an intervention only for people with substance use disorders, and it's much broader than that.
Right.
It's reaching a huge realm of people who are going through change.
So, Jeremy, you mentioned the research. Can you talk a little bit about that evidence base, or that whatever you want to call it, that platform that it rests on?
Yeah, we have to date over 2,000 randomized clinical trials showing efficacy of motivational interviewing, and I think something like 200 meta-analyses on motivational interviewing. So there's a wide range of research across various populations out there, and various levels too. So the research is pretty robust in the substance use treatment area. We could talk about some substance use, some substances that are used, if you will, that there's less research for. But some populations have much better research base for them than others. But in the realm of substance use disorders, certainly is very extensive. It's been studied in primary health care, diabetes, heart conditions, giving people feedback on and helping them make behavioral decisions around primary health care issues. Child and adolescent, family, I should say families and adolescents. There's a lot of research around that. Criminal justice.
Yeah, that's where I think that may be where I, if not first, early on began to see more and more reference to MI, particularly around training probation officers and other folks who are interacting with kids who are incarcerated or, adjudicated delinquent, whatever term, you want to use, which seemed like a really good step forward in having relationships with those kids and their families. So, Mike, in your work, you, and Jeremy, you certainly may as well, but I know, Mike, you specifically are doing work with kids and families using MI.
Yes, and really coming from the justice side of things, I think that it was such a natural fit with juvenile justice reform, and the different approach rather than the punitive approach of partnering. Jeremy used the term collaborative, more collaborating approach. And in supporting change for youth, we know that supporting change for the whole family system predicts not just initiated, but arguably more importantly, sustained change for youth. And so that use, both with the youth individually, but then also with the family system. And then you could say that it extends even more into the other systems involved in the life of that kid and of that family, that some of those same conversational styles that are guided by the principles and certainly the philosophy of motivational interviewing fit in with conversations with everybody, but especially with the family system, because it is strongly collaborative. And for me, very importantly, it is in that collaboration, or in the style that it is a guided conversation. It really acknowledges where the person is stage-wise in terms of their readiness to consider change, and then matching that approach rather than getting ahead, like, Jeremy, you were talking about in, the old days with AOD. We're going to beat you over the head with psychoeducation until it finally sinks in. And it doesn't finally sink in. It has to be from that person's perspective, and really match to where they are in terms of their readiness to consider change, which is a little bit of an oversimplification because nobody can be boiled down to a single readiness to change, but
Sure.
along those lines.
Well, one of the things that we often ask of interventions or techniques or skills that are gaining popularity or are popular and have evidence is, we often ask kind of, so what's the secret sauce? What is the, what's the ingredient within there that is, kind of the activator? And I think what I've heard in the conversation, at least one of the elements of the secret sauce is the listening part. That really struck me, Jeremy, when you were talking very specifically about that. So I'm assuming that there's skill development around listening, even though we all kind of think we know how to listen,
Absolutely. Foundational to any learning process in motivational interviewing is empathy. So learning how to be empathic. And part of that, a huge part of that, is listening to what the person has to say about whatever you're talking about, and taking that in and being able to accurately understand where they're coming from, and then completing the cycle by reflecting that back. So statements back to the person, empathic statements back to the person that show that you understand what they're telling you, and deeper issues going on that maybe they're not telling you yet, but you're inviting them to explore.
Can MI be used out of the context of any other modality or structured approach? So can it be done as a standalone, if you will? I don't even know if that question makes sense, but that's what is in my head.
Yeah, it can be used both as a standalone and in conjunction with other approaches.
Okay.
So it's been studied both ways. It's been shown to be effective both ways. Interestingly, been studied with cognitive behavioral approaches extensively. And what they found is that when motivational interviewing is used in conjunction with cognitive behavioral therapy, because they go after different areas of the change process, if you will, both the CBT approach and the motivational approach are enhanced by each other, by the presence of each other. So they fit very well together that way.
Yeah, and that makes so much sense, because you see so many in the CBT world, you see so many hyphenated approaches, with trauma, with this, with that, so there's those key elements that kind of activate its effectiveness, but then there's a tailoring that can also take place, which makes a lot of sense. And I think the pairing of those two, at least to me, seems to make a lot of sense too. So Jeremy, you talked about that the kind of the genesis of MI was really around the treatment of drug and alcohol disorders. So beyond that, where else, and this question for both of you, but beyond AOD, where has there been additional significant traction, if you will, in terms of interest in MI and application, not just interest, but application as well?
Certainly, and I didn't mention behavioral health, mental health, various mental illnesses it's been used for. There have been books written on the use of MI with depression and anxiety, and severe and persistent mental illnesses, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. It's a part of models that are geared toward helping people with severe and persistent mental illness, eating disorders. So we go on and on in that area, but it really have tried to broaden it in the mental health area.
Yeah, and I think that there's been a big adoption in the medical field as well, that uses it quite a bit. And you had mentioned juvenile justice, but also adult justice. Recently, there's been growing interest in research. The research isn't big, but it's starting on the child welfare side of things. It's supporting dialogues, communication with parents and caregivers that are mandated in that way, which similar maybe mandate considerations from the justice side of things.
Well, one of the things that we do is we post, a selection of articles, PowerPoints, whatever, that you to want to suggest and recommend, and we'll put alongside it. And I know CEBP, I was looking at your website today, and you guys have a lot of really great information. I really liked the diagram of the, do you call it the yardstick or the
readiness ruler?
Readiness ruler. There is something about just looking at that it kind of clicked a few things in my head, because when I was reading the continuum of points along the way, it made sense. It kind of gave it a sense of what would I be either hearing from somebody or what would I be saying to somebody in an MI environment.
And the readiness ruler is a good illustration of how we're and another key area of motivational interviewing, key ingredient of motivational interviewing, that we really can't talk about MI without talking about this ingredient. But the readiness ruler essentially is just a Likert scale to ask the person how important and or how confident, hopefully and both, how confident, so how important this change is, and how confident they are that they can actually do it.
Yeah.
And then there's follow-up questions to that. So they choose a number, 0 to 10, 10 being the most important thing in their life right now, 0 being not even on their radar. How important is this particular change to them? They choose a number, and then we ask them follow-up questions. Why that number and not some lower number? In other words, how did you get all the way up to a 4? And then we ask them, what would it take to go from that 4 just one notch higher to a 5? Both of those questions are designed to elicit what we call change talk, which is language in the direction of change. And what we know from the research in motivational interviewing is that the more change talk that we're hearing coming out of the person's mouth, the more likely they are to eventually change down the road. That there's a correlation there between those two. And there's also stronger correlation for certain types of change talk. So a lot of motivational interviewing is skills to use within the conversation that helps a person get talking about change. What we know is that the more people talk about change, the more they're talking themselves into change psychologically. We also know the reverse. The more people are talking about not changing and or pushing back against us because we're trying to tell them what to do, the less likely they are to change. Right. So we have that dynamic going on that Bill Miller and others, Steve Rolnick and other researchers recognize very early on, that we're constantly paying attention to as we have a conversation with somebody. So that's critical to MI too, having an eye on that language.
Yeah. That makes a lot.
In that last piece to talk just a second. Sorry, Patrick. No. That you were talking about, Jeremy, will resonate with a lot of folks, that I'm not in line with what you're talking about as the let's say support professional, because it's not just for a therapist. Not in line with what you're talking about. I'm pushing back against that, or by really emphasizing the sustained talk. Now they call or refer to as discord. But in the old days, which would be more than 15 years ago, I guess, it was called resistance, which is how I still think about it. I will never eradicate that term from my thinking.
Yeah.
But resistance or discord is maybe a little bit less pejorative, a little bit less judgy about the individual, because it's perfectly natural. If you're confronted with something and you're not ready to be confronted about it, you're going to push back. You are going to have that discord in that direction, and exploring reasons not to change is perfectly normal. And if you're an adherent to the trans-theoretical model and stages of change, you can't change without exploring reasons not to change. So perfectly normalizing that. So
Yeah.
and that recognition of feeling those both sides.
Right.
Is identified as ambivalence, and it's key to keeping your ears open for that, like Jeremy was talking about with change talk and sustained talk.
So
really both thinking about change, just
right.
in different directions.
So for a really skilled practitioner of MI, does the research show, and I'm not familiar with the research at all, and in fact, that was going to be one of my questions, just to talk a little bit about that. But so if somebody is really particularly skilled in this practice, does the trajectory generally take an upswing as opposed to 2 steps forward, 3 back, 3 steps forward, 2 back? It feels like it would be fairly smooth and not too up and down. I'm thinking of a graph in my head. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm thinking it feels like somebody who really, has this down. It feels like it's a bit of a journey that is moving forward for the most part. Maybe that's the better way to say it.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we've learned from motivational interviewing over the years and practicing it is that it removes a lot of the obstacles that often get in the way of change occurring for people.
Right.
So when Michael was just talking about, telling people what to do with their own lives, the more you tell somebody what to do with their own life, the more they back up and go and move against that. And start thinking about not changing because you're already voicing all of the reasons why they should change.
Right.
So there's this automatic human reaction to think about not changing, and that makes it more likely that a person won't change. So when we remove that obstacle, the helping staff person avoiding being the expert, telling the person what to do, arguing for the person why they should change, when we stop with kind of grilling people with yes or no questions, closed-ended questions, and start opening it up and having a conversation, we remove a lot of the speed bumps on the road towards making a change in the person's life, and we actually find that we're more efficient in the process as a result. I don't know how much the actual research shows. I'm not familiar with any studies that show that it's a faster process. But it certainly is smoother when you're working with the person versus trying to convince them to do something they don't want to do.
Well, it's like you just said, it's that whole thing that all of us get a reaction to the word should. All of us, when somebody approaches you and tells you you should be doing something this way or that way, even if they're right, it's like the first reaction is not to be welcoming of that observation. It's to kind of, first of all, it's like, who are you to tell me, what I should be doing? So
exactly.
Yeah, makes sense.
The smoother piece in that.
Yeah.
It's kind of next door to I think the way you were conceptualizing it, Patrick. So I'm sidestepping that a little bit, but The smoother piece might be in the experience for the practitioner themselves, in that it's taking some of the weight off of their shoulders. Where in the old days, like Jeremy was talking about, in the old days with SOD, we had to convince them to change. It can take the weight off the shoulders of the practitioner that it is a partnership, and it's not up to me to convince you, but we're going to work together. And so
Mhm.
that does take some of that pressure off. You can quote this better than I can, I'm sure, Jeremy, in the new edition, and we didn't mention that the fourth edition of Motivational Interviewing was released in the fall of 2023.
Oh, okay.
And in that edition, there's a quote that I really like, and if I like it, you'd think I'd be able to quote it directly, and I can't. It's not wrong to want to make somebody to change. It's just impossible. And I really like that. That resonated, and I think it really speaks to the utility and the power of motivational interviewing, because it is that working with, not working on.
Yeah. I like that. I think that's a good little poster in front of your face when you're practicing. It's keeping this in mind. Can you talk a little bit about, so we're going to go just as I said at the beginning, this is not a training, but can you talk a little bit about what that globally that training looks like for somebody or an organization? Let's talk about a person who's going to enroll and step forward and is open to learning this. Kind of what in general is the coursework and the curriculum and the process. And I also want to then kind of circle around that and talk about the fidelity and the support of that. So maybe just a few words about kind of what that outline looks like in terms of training.
Yeah, it takes different forms, and Michael may do it different than I do. I'm sure he does. So the Center for Evidence-Based Practices, historically, our basic training to kind of bring people through all of the core skills of the model is roughly about 2 days worth of training, or 12 hours, 12 to 14 hours, something like that. And that will give you all the core pieces and give you some knowledge and understanding of what the model is all about, get you excited about it. We do a lot of practice in motivational interviewing training, so there's a lot of exercises mixed in there for each skill set to make sure that people are understanding and are able to apply the skills. So that practical experience is really critical in motivational interviewing. In fact, we know that people don't learn motivational interviewing from training. So their skills may improve a little bit initially, and then they die off pretty quick without additional support. So what we often do is build in learning groups where we sit down with staff that have gone through training periodically over the course of, however long the organization can do that, 4, 6, 8 months, a year. We sit down with smaller groups and we talk through, okay, how is your practice going? What are you trying? What's working? What's not? Let's work through some of the challenges. And then often out of that comes some theme that we can base an exercise on, and we do additional practice around that particular thing. So that's a piece of it. And another critical piece to how we train people is, there's two actually, getting supervisors on board and or champions, people that are really excited about it, that are interested in helping other people learn, giving them resources. There's a lot of information out there now about how people learn motivational interviewing and how we can support people who are learning motivational interviewing that we didn't have when we started. And so we try and teach that to leaders in the MI implementation, so that they can kind of carry the torch and make sure that they're working with staff beyond when we're involved as a contracting agency, to help keep the practice alive. So think implementation science here. All the implementation science that we know about applies to MI. And then the other core piece to people learning MI is getting specific feedback on their skills. So it's what we a practice we call coding, which is person completes a recording or does some live observation situation, and we use a standardized measure in order to measure their skills and then give them feedback on their skills. And that process has been shown to be the most effective way to help people make huge progress on their skills. The downside is that it's more labor intensive,
right? For sure.
For people.
Right. You know, when you mentioned implementation science, and I'm stepping into the Wayback Machine with some colleagues over the years who are experts in implementation science. And actually, one of our podcasts is on with two folks, two colleagues who have a great deal of experience in that area. But I do remember one slide that one of my friends, who's a trainer in implementation science, and she's a scientist herself, in contrasting how we used to do things to how we need to do things, she always used the term, spray and pray, that was the traditional method of training, where we would just spray it as wide as we possibly could, and then just pray that some of it stuck. And I think what you're highlighting, and certainly what we've learned along the way, is your 2 days don't add up to anything if there isn't something later, if there isn't something that supports that brings that back full circle. I mean, it might be a great 2 days, don't get me wrong. I'm sure you guys are fabulous. But that in and of itself isn't going to make the change. And the other thing we certainly learned was it's really great if you have somebody, so if you're training staff at an organization, it's really key to try to have somebody who is their supervisor also trained for that kind of in-house coaching, so that you have somebody right there to go to who actually knows what your training, was about and what skills you're supposed to be developing. So that was kind of a long-winded story, but that's been my experience.
Does not necessarily need to be the person's supervisor. A lot of staff make that assumption. You can get feedback from coworkers.
Sure.
But the best feedback that you get is from the client themselves, from the person that you're working with. But you can get feedback from anywhere. But absolutely right, Patrick. You want somebody who understands the model, who is either learning alongside you or has learned this and ideally done some more practice around it, and can give you some solid objective feedback.
Yeah. I mean, it's really tough to be the only person who gets a training in something and then goes back to their work site and is expected to implement that particular thing. And there's really nobody there to help them or figure it out or problem solve or help go through motivational interviewing with them to try to get through the steps. How is fidelity measured? Is it through the same recording process or the coding process that you talked about, Jeremy?
Yes. Yeah, there are standardized measures. It's all individual. So a lot of times we talk about fidelity in terms of an organization or a team.
Right.
But in this case, the fidelity measures are based on the individual's skills. And so there are validated instruments, standardized validated instruments that we use to measure a person's skills in motivational interviewing. It doesn't measure everything,
Sure.
But it gets to the heart of what we're looking for.
Okay. Good. I know that you are a part of MINT, M-I-N-T. Can you say a little bit about that? Because it sounds like this is related to the idea of quality improvement. And
it is. So the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers is an international group They have a website, motivationalinterviewing.org, in case people want to check that out. The
Oh,
reason
yeah.
why I suggest people go there is this group is dedicated to getting out there as many resources for free as possible to people who are trying to learn motivational interviewing. So there's a lot of things that people have just uploaded on this website that they've developed that they want other people to have. There are things that you purchase too, books
Sure.
and video recordings and things like that on there. But so they run that website, but the core of this group is an international group that really helps to support the practice of motivational interviewing around the world.
Okay.
MI has been translated into many different languages and is used in many different countries. So it's cross-cultural that way. I'm forgetting the actual numbers, but it's right around 30 to 50 languages and countries. But this group helps with that kind of getting it out to other cultures, other countries. It runs what's called TNT trainings, training of new trainers, trainings every year that bring in additional folks into the fold that want to become trainers and get the benefits of the membership in that organization. So they do that. Most of those trainings are learning how to do a bunch of different practice exercises that you can use to help people learn the skills, and then also getting updated on the latest and greatest around motivational interviewing. And the other thing that they've been working on is a certification process for trainers.
Okay.
And so a method by which they can measure and give feedback and help support trainers that are out there, get feedback on their skills. And then many of these members have developed these coding tools that we're talking about. And they use the coding tools to bring people into the membership of Mint and also teach other people how to do this so that their organizations can get better at the practice.
Okay. Jumping back a point or two, Mike, you talked about the adaptation that seems to be of interest in the child welfare field. And I know that you sent in a couple of one-pager, two-pager resources. How did that come about? How did it come about that child welfare folks, did they reach out? Was it something they were encouraged to do? Was it somebody's great idea? Because I really think that's a great interest, just like we were talking about juvenile justice before, in terms of training folks who are interfacing directly with kids and families.
Well, here's something you don't hear that often, I think. The great idea came from the feds. That's a self-amusing comment, everybody. But no, it was recognized at the federal level that motivational interviewing increased the odds of change, pure and simple. And so when you're thinking about outcomes, whether you're thinking from a practical standpoint of financial measurement or a far more important practical standpoint of increasing safety for children, motivational interviewing seems to be a good fit. There is not a lot of evidence just on the child welfare side yet. It has great face validity. The pieces that motivational interviewing has used to build itself up, coming from a very humanistic approach, are a really good fit, that type of relationship. But it's not a clean match necessarily. So the feds identified it because it is identified as an evidence-based practice. It's right. Crossed that bar saying that there's strong evidence supporting that this does lead to change. But with any evidence-based practice, there's really strong boundaries around the studies that led to that. And so In child welfare, it does in an evidence-based way support that it leads to decreased drug and alcohol use in parents who have been identified as coming into the child welfare system because of the drug and alcohol use. But it's being applied more widely than that because it feels like it's a really good fit for supporting change across the board, not just about supporting decreased drug and alcohol use, decreased all the way to abstinence in parents and caregivers, but across the board for all of the things that would bring folks into the attention of child welfare. And so it has been supported that way at the federal level, where there can be increased funding for child welfare agencies that incorporate this as part of their approach. The piece that's not an immediate clean fit is that child welfare, much like other mandated support roles, comes with a very clear set of preconceived expectations for those coming in that are mandated in. There's things that have to be done. Child welfare has a little bit of extra on top of that because there are clear timelines as well. And so in that relationship, they're finding ways to match motivational interviewing, not blend it, but just to match it in an unaltered form so that you can have that collaborative relationship while also acknowledging the power differential in that relationship. And so that is, I think that's the big move there, is acknowledging that power differential, being very transparent about that, being very purposeful in the dialogues in ways to frame it from the traditions of motivational interviewing and the learning of motivational interviewing. And so I think the secret sauce, going back to a term you used before in that area, really comes from the foundational philosophy of motivational interviewing, which they describe as the spirit of motivational interviewing, which really channels a humanistic approach and a strongly collaborative approach.
And I do think that humanistic shimmer with it is really quite positive and quite powerful, and would really speak to a lot of folks who are in our, talking globally, our world of work of, wanting to be helpful, wanting to be a resource, wanting to be, a catalyst for people to move ahead with their changes. So yeah, that's great.
I think that there's many that would agree exactly with the way you framed that, with being hopeful, because if there's not hope for change, change will not happen. And so it can really support, starting at that level, collaborating on hope for change and then moving forward together from there.
Yeah. Well, we're going to wrap up here in a minute, but I did want to jump back real quick, Jeremy. You talked about kind of learning communities with folks who have been trained and practitioners as a way to get support and work through challenges. Are there, or is there like a set of core areas that I'll say are typically areas of challenge for people that you see this is something more than this that folks struggle with or have to really process through in a different way, or need more support in getting to as they learn their training, as they implement? Are there areas that are, maybe across the board identified as, this was really hard. This part really was uphill?
Definitely. I think people think that they understand reflective listening. They know about it, but doing it well, and being able to go from what the person's telling you on the surface to what's maybe lurking underneath the surface, and seeing and observing what's happening and being able to respond to a person in a way that they feel supported and also understood. That can be very challenging for staff. And a lot of times staff will think that they've got this down. They understand reflections and they're doing them. And what they're really doing oftentimes is focusing on just what the person's saying. So
Yeah.
there's an art to that,
Yeah.
how you do that, how often you do that, and helping the conversation kind of move, helping the person process, that are really challenging for people to learn.
Yeah.
I would say another area that is really hard for people is to let go of trying to get the person to change. So
Yeah.
letting go of those barriers, those obstacles we were talking about earlier, those speed bumps, letting
Mhm.
go of those old behaviors that we have, this strong desire to tell people what to do and why they ought to change in their own lives, and allowing the person to process that for themselves. That's really difficult for staff that we teach in motivational interviewing. We all have a natural gut desire to share information that we know might be really helpful for somebody who's suffering, who's going through a difficult time. And that often can get in the way of
Yeah.
people thinking about change.
Yeah.
And the third area that occurs to me that's really difficult for people is resistance, responding to resistance, what we call discord and sustained
Mhm.
talk, kind of fit under that umbrella of resistance. But this pushback that we experience when we're trying to help somebody and they say, "You don't even know me, why
Yeah.
are you telling me what to do?"
Mhm.
When they push back, to be able to manage your own reactions well enough that you can respond in a way that's effective and helpful and gets discord to go down, gets that problem in the relationship to go down enough that you can collaborate again.
Yeah.
That is really, really challenging for
Yeah.
folks.
Yeah. Kind of keep the temperature fairly even.
Yes.
Yeah, to try to manage that. So I want to kind of just wrap up with your thoughts about, so both for Ohio or bigger than Ohio, in our, working in our human service systems, is there kind of a next, I don't want to say iteration, but a next focal point or desire out there among MI developers, MI practitioners to kind of take it to where it hasn't been before, not to be a Star Trek thing, but to go boldly. I'm just wondering.
All right. So, Patrick, are you speaking of in Ohio itself, kind of where we're going next,
Yeah,
or in general in the practice, or?
both. Like, so in our state, where's kind of the energy around MI, where, what's the engine that's kind of pushing it, sustaining it? And then I guess globally, I was thinking, are there areas where the core community of MI would like to see it go, that perhaps it hasn't traversed yet or touched base yet, or has had the impact yet that folks would like to see?
It's two of the biggest growing areas that I've seen are primary care and criminal justice. There's just been a huge surge
Okay.
in building in motivational interviewing, and I would say child welfare is
Mhm.
work is a big one too. More and more motivational interviewing is working its way into the policy language and expectations of funders, um,
Good
and being
point.
recognized that way. And so a lot of organizations are now, well, have been for some time, but especially now taking interest in it and wanting to figure out how to apply it into their settings within their organizations. So that's a big push right now. It's
Okay.
just it's made it into the language of funders uh, and expectations.
Okay.
In terms of I don't know if Michael, you want to say anything about that?
I was just thinking about not just the outcomes that are supported by that you're talking about with those different fields that are tackling it, but going back to something I'd mentioned previously with taking the weight off the shoulders. really thinking about workforce challenges
Mm.
and high turnover,
Mm-hmm.
I think it really offers an opportunity to increase support for the professional
Mm.
themselves
Mm.
and quite possibly, increase satisfaction, decrease turnover.
Mm-hmm. And retention, essentially.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. See
Yeah.
that, yeah, that formula would make sense to me. That would be an interesting research project.
Yeah.
Study practitioners or folks who've gotten MI training and support in those who haven't, and yeah, some interest there.
And
Yeah.
there's quite a bit of information out there now about using motivational interviewing in leadership positions and supervision, supporting your staff using these practices now as well, which goes along with what Michael's talking about there. So that is a really interesting and important area of this. How can you help your staff uh, hang in there and
Yeah.
not take it so personally, and
Right.
let go of some things,
Right.
and be there with people rather than trying to force them to change.
Yeah. 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 Just change. Yeah. Change that dynamic. Yeah. Just change that dynamic, which can be done, as you all are showing that it can. Well, listen, any closing comments, anything you want to say before we wrap up? This has been a great conversation. I think for folks who are interested, have heard about, maybe, have some proximity to the orbit of MI, I hope this will be of interest to them. That's how we'll kind of push it forward. So anything you want to say, just kind of wrapping up? You could say.
Doesn't feel like a place that I should have drawn a blank, but I was going to promote Jeremy Center. If you're out there and you see a training offered by the Center for Evidence-Based Practices, CEBP at Case Western,
Yeah.
that's where to go. They do such a phenomenal job.
Yeah, I would concur.
Well, thank you. I would send kudos back the other way too. Center for Innovative Practices has done a lot of work in helping youth and families change their lives and grow
Yeah.
as well. I would say to people in general, if you're finding yourself frustrated in having conversations with people about change, if you're feeling burnt out, if
Mhm.
you're looking for a way that you can make those conversations go easier and feel better about the work that you're doing, maybe adding something in that can really help you, I'd consider taking a look at motivational interviewing and seeing whether it fits within what you're trying to do. There are always challenges to implementing MI. We know that organizations that are more confrontational, more directive, tend to not fit very well with motivational interviewing. So there may need to be some cultural changes there. Clinicians that are really good at empathy tend to get really good outcomes from not only practice and motivational interviewing, but outcomes with their people that they're serving in general. So
Yeah.
if you're looking for a practice that can help you enhance what you're already doing and connect with people better, I would take a look at MI.
Yeah. And there's always that question of, is it a good fit? I mean, that's what people always need to ask as they contemplate, adding things to their repertoire or to their continuum is this a good fit for us? Is this something that we're going to be able to do, that we want to do, and have the resources to accomplish? So thank you both so very much. Jeremy, nice seeing you again and catching up after a long time. Mike,
Good to see you.
I see and communicate with more regularly, but it's always a pleasure to share a conversation like this. So thanks again, and have a good rest of the day.